Raymond Okafor had already belittled his wife 3 times in 4 minutes when Steve Harvey stopped smiling. By the time Raymond did it a 4th time, cutting off his wife Pauline mid-answer, slapping the podium with an open palm, and telling the Family Feud audience that she didn't know what she was talking about, Steve Harvey had walked 12 feet across the stage, placed himself between Raymond and the podium, and said 5 words into a microphone that the entire studio could hear. The audience didn't gasp. They erupted. All 207 of them, on their feet in under 4 seconds. And Raymond Okafor, a 54-year-old retired civil engineer from Columbus, Ohio, who had driven 9 hours to be on this show, stood alone at the center of a stage where nobody, for the first time in a very long time, was willing to pretend he hadn't just done exactly what he'd done. It was a Thursday in Atlanta. October 5th, 2023, Stage 4 at the Reeves Building was 40 minutes into what the production schedule listed as a routine afternoon taping. 2 families, 2 rounds. The Okafor family from Columbus, Ohio, had made it through the pre-show rehearsal without incident, which is to say Raymond had stayed quiet long enough for the producers to check the right boxes and move everyone to their marks. The opposing family, the Delgados from San Antonio, were warm and loud and kept forgetting to wait for the floor director's signal before they talked. Pauline Okafor, 52, had been a middle school science teacher for 24 years. She stood at the Family Feud podium in a blue blazer she'd bought specifically for this trip and answered Steve Harvey's first 2 questions so cleanly and quickly that Steve had turned to the audience and said, "This woman came ready." The audience laughed. Pauline smiled with the particular care of someone who has learned to receive compliments quickly before they can be taken away. Raymond stood 1 step behind her and to the left. He had his arms crossed. Their 3 adult children, Tobias, 29, Amara, 26, and David, 23, stood in the family row behind the podium. Tobias, the eldest, had a posture that told a story anyone paying attention could read. He stood like someone who had spent years watching a room and calculating whether he needed to move. But nobody in that studio knew what was about to happen. What nobody on that production crew knew, what the casting coordinators hadn't caught in the pre-interviews, what the legal waivers didn't ask about, was that Pauline Okafor had filed for a protective order 14 months earlier. She had withdrawn it 6 weeks later. She had not told her children. She had not told her sister in Detroit. She had told the intake counselor at the Franklin County Courthouse that she wasn't sure it was bad enough to be official about. The intake counselor had given her a pamphlet. Pauline had taken it home and put it in the same kitchen drawer where she kept the takeout menus and the extra batteries, because it needed to be somewhere she could reach it without anyone noticing she had it. The insurance piece had come later, and it had come quietly, the way these things always did. In January of 2023, Pauline's therapist, a licensed counselor she'd been seeing every other week since the summer before, submitted a treatment continuation request to the family's insurance provider. The response came back in 11 days. Coverage for ongoing therapeutic intervention not supported under current plan classification. Pauline appealed. The appeal was reviewed and denied in March, with a form letter explaining that her case had been evaluated against clinical necessity benchmarks and did not qualify for continued authorization. She submitted a second appeal in April with a letter from her therapist and a letter from her primary care physician. That was denied in May. She stopped submitting appeals in June because the process required her to take personal days from work, and she had used all of them. She had been paying $140 out of pocket every other week since July. She had not told Raymond. She had moved the money from a savings account she'd opened at a different bank in 2019, the year things got worse. She called it her Teacher's Professional Development Fund on the label she'd written on the folder in her filing cabinet. because Raymond never asked about professional development. She had been doing this math, $140 every 2 weeks, 11 sessions, $1,540 total, for 4 months before she stepped onto that stage in Atlanta. The first round went cleanly enough that a person not paying attention would have missed the fractures. Raymond interrupted Pauline's answer to question 3 with "That's not what they're looking for" before she finished her sentence. The board proved him wrong. He didn't acknowledge it. When Steve made a light comment about team communication, Raymond laughed the laugh of a man who has always been the one who decides what's funny. The second round was where it broke open. Steve asked, "Name something a husband does that makes family time feel like a test." Pauline leaned toward the microphone and said, "Scores everyone's answers." Raymond's palm hit the podium. The crack of it was loud enough that 2 audience members physically flinched. He said, "She doesn't know." He stepped in front of her. He said, to the audience, to Steve, to the cameras, to no one specifically and therefore to everyone, "She doesn't know what she's talking about. Let me handle this." The studio fell completely silent. Steve Harvey did not move immediately. He stood at his microphone and he looked at Raymond Okafor for a long moment that the editing team would later note lasted exactly 4 seconds. 4 seconds that, when the clip went online, thousands of people would screenshot and caption and post because of what was visible in Steve Harvey's face during those 4 seconds. It was not anger. It was something older than anger. It was recognition. And then Steve Harvey was moving. He covered 12 feet of stage in 8 steps. He placed himself between Raymond and the podium. He put the microphone to his mouth. The audience had already gone still. And then Steve Harvey said the 5 words, and the audience went the other direction entirely. They erupted, all 207 of them, in a single upward motion, and the sound of it was so sudden and so complete that the audio team had to pull the house feed back 4 seconds later to save the master recording. "Sir, you need to leave." Raymond Okafor blinked. He said, "Excuse me?" Steve did not repeat himself. He looked at the floor director. He looked at security. He looked back at Raymond, and he waited with the absolute patience of a man who has learned that silence, applied correctly, is louder than anything he could say. Raymond Okafor was escorted off the Family Feud stage at 2:47 in the afternoon on October 5, 2023. It took less than 90 seconds. He did not say anything as he was walked to the side door. He looked, for the first time since the cameras had started rolling, like a man who was not in control of what was happening around him. His youngest son, David, watched him go from the family row with his jaw set and his hands flat on his thighs. Tobias Okafor, 29, stood up from the family row without being asked and walked to where his mother was standing at the podium. He stood next to her. That was all. He just stood next to her. The studio fell completely silent for the second time. Steve Harvey looked at Tobias. Then he looked at Pauline. He said, "Ma'am, I want to ask you something, and I need you to hear me when I say there's no wrong answer." He paused. "How long?" Pauline Okafor looked at Steve Harvey. She did not look at the cameras. She did not look at the audience. She looked at Steve Harvey the way people look at someone they have just decided to trust, quickly and quietly and with everything that implies. She said, "Long enough that my son knows how to stand next to me without me having to ask." The crew was not okay. The boom operator on the left side of the set had his head turned away from his monitor. The camera operator at position 3, a 19-year veteran of live production named Sasha, kept her shot locked, but could not, according to 3 separate production staff who were present, keep her shoulders still. David, the youngest, was crying without making any sound at all. And then Amara, 26, who had not spoken and had not moved since her father left the stage, said something to nobody in particular, quietly enough that only the clip mic on her blazer lapel caught it. She said, "Is Daddy going to die?" And then immediately, younger child quick, she corrected herself. I mean, are we? Are we going to be okay? The production pause that followed lasted 11 minutes. Raymond was carrying a secret that would soon change everything, but not in the way anyone watching expected. Steve Harvey had left the stage during the pause. When he came back with a phone. He did not explain where he had gotten it or who had authorized it, because neither of those things mattered, and everyone on the production team had quietly decided not to make them matter. He walked to Tobias Okafor and he said, "Is there someone your mother would want to hear from right now? Someone who's been in her corner?" Tobias thought for 3 seconds. He said, "My brother Marcus. Her oldest. He didn't come because he's in the army. He's stationed in Fort Campbell." The production team found a number. Steve Harvey made the call from the stage. Specialist Marcus Okafor, 31, answered from a break room at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, not knowing what number was calling. When Steve Harvey told him who he was and why he was calling, there was a silence of about 5 seconds. And then Marcus Okafor said, "Is my mom okay?" Steve held the phone out to Pauline. She said, "I'm okay, baby." He said, "Mom, I'm coming home in December, and when I get there, we're going to figure out the next part together. All of us. Okay?" Tobias had his arm around his mother before she finished saying yes. Steve wasn't done. He turned to the remaining Okafor family, Tobias, Amara, David, Pauline, and he told them what he saw. He didn't editorialize. He described it plainly. A woman who had come 9 hours to be on a television show and had stood at a podium and gotten every answer right, including the ones that weren't on the board. He said, "The bravest thing I have ever seen on this stage is not someone winning $100,000. It's someone standing at a microphone after a lifetime of being told they don't know what they're talking about and answering anyway." He looked at the camera. He said, "To everyone watching at home right now, if you know that woman, if you are that woman, I want you to hear me. Being right about your own life does not require anyone else's permission." Then he turned to the Delgado family, who had been standing on their side of the stage for 23 minutes, without being asked, and without leaving. Maria Delgado, the family's mother, 58, had been holding a tissue since minute 4. She crossed the stage and handed it to Pauline without a word, and the audience, which had already been through more emotional weather in one afternoon than most tapings produced in a full season, somehow found more to give. Steve wasn't done. He told Tobias what the Tobias move, the standing next to someone move, was worth. He said, "There are men in this world who learned everything wrong about how to be a man. And some of them raise sons who learn it too. And some of them raise sons who look at what's wrong and decide to do the opposite. You decided, when you were young enough that it cost you something to decide it. That's the thing I want you to carry." He paused, because about 20 years ago, an old man at a gas station looked at me. I was a mess, I was nowhere, I had nothing, and he said, "God's got a plan bigger than your pain." I didn't know that man. I'll never see him again. But I held on to that, and I'm standing here today because of it. He looked at Tobias. You be that for somebody. You already started. Both families received their prizes. The production team quietly ensured the Okafor family's travel and lodging costs were covered for an additional night. The Delgados declined to leave until they had exchanged numbers with Pauline. Maria Delgado told Pauline, in Spanish and then in English, that she was welcome in San Antonio for as long as she wanted. The clip, 11 minutes and 40 seconds, posted without edits, crossed 40 million views in the first 36 hours. By day 4, it had reached 140 million. By the end of October, it had been viewed 290 million times across platforms, shared in 61 countries, and translated into 17 languages by volunteer subtitle teams who posted the versions themselves without being asked. The hashtag #SirYouNeedToLeave reached #1 in 22 countries within 48 hours. Domestic violence hotlines in the United States reported a 34% spike in first-time callers in the week following the clip's release. The National Coalition Against Domestic Violence cited the clip specifically in their Q4 2023 report. Steve Harvey's foundation announced the Raymond Initiative in November of 2023, named not after Raymond Okafor the man, but after what Steve called the Raymond moment. The moment in any household when someone decides the pattern stops here. In its first 8 months, the Raymond Initiative funded counseling access for 22,000 women and provided legal aid navigation for 400 individuals seeking protective orders in states where the process required paid legal representation. By mid-2024, the initiative had partnered with 31 bar associations to provide pro bono support, and it helped draft model legislation in 4 states reforming the insurance classification of trauma-related therapeutic care. Specialist Marcus Okafor came home in December, as promised. He spent 11 days in Columbus. He drove his mother to her therapist's office on a Tuesday morning, sat in the waiting room, and when she came out, took her to lunch at the diner she'd been going to since before he was born. He told her, over coffee, that the 3 of them, him, Tobias, David, had talked and they had a plan, and she didn't have to carry the financial part of this alone anymore. Pauline Okafor looked at her oldest son across a diner table and said something she had never said in exactly this way to anyone. I forgot I didn't have to. Raymond Okafor completed a 26-week intervention program in 2024. He did not do so publicly. He called Tobias in the spring to say he had started. Tobias told him he was glad. They did not speak again for several months. What happened after that is their family's story to tell, and they have not told it. And that is their right. Pauline Okafor returned to her middle school classroom on October 9th, 2023, 4 days after the taping. She did not tell her students what had happened. They had already seen the clip. 22 of them had watched it over the weekend. They did not ask her about it. They just came into class and sat down, and one girl, 7th grade, 13 years old, a student Pauline had been quietly worried about all semester, walked to the front of the room before the bell and put a handwritten note on her desk, and walked back to her seat and never said a word about it. The note said, "Mrs. Okafor, you were right. About everything." Pauline kept it. It is in a different drawer now, not the one with the pamphlet. The stage at the Reeves Building in Atlanta has a specific spot, 12 feet from the host podium, dead center, where the floor director put a small piece of yellow tape during the October 5 taping to mark the position Steve Harvey walked to when he stopped the game. The tape was removed during the next taping's setup, but 3 members of the production crew independently reported, in separate interviews months later, that they had gone back to stand on that spot. Just to stand there. Just to see what it felt like to be in the place where someone decided that enough was enough. Some moments don't need a word count. They just need a witness. If this story is about someone you know, or someone you are, share it without explanation. Let them watch it from the beginning. Subscribe if you're new, because this channel is built for the stories that stay with you long after the screen goes dark. And if you've been standing at a podium your whole life, answering correctly, waiting for someone to notice. Consider this your notice.